My name is Rod Diradon. I'm the Executive Director of the Mineta Transportation Institute and the Mineta National Transit Research Consortium, made up of 9 universities across the United States. Those are listed on the last page, second to last page of your program. And as I'll do several times today, I'm going to refer you to a page and then ask you to read what's on the page. You can read faster than I can talk, and it takes less time away from our panel. And these people are really the best there are in the United States. And I don't want to dilute their presentations by taking a lot of time. So we've got to trust you to go to the right page and read the material, including not only this page, but also the bios for each one of the presenters. And they're in there in the order of the presentations. So please do go to those when each one comes up, so that you can realize what remarkable people you have speaking to you today. The last page then tells you about the Mineta National Transit Research Consortium, or METRIC, and this is a presentation of METRIC. The last page I'll refer to before you get the speakers is the inside back cover, and that's the Mineta Transportation Institute's Board of Trustees. They are who's who in the world of transportation in the United States. We're very proud to have them as our policy leads, and we are very proud also to have at least a couple of them here. Rose Gilbo, who came in just a minute ago, just retired as Vice President for AAA, and thank you for being here and for all your support over the years, Rose. And let me get this right. Diane Woodard-Jones, Principal and Chair of the Board. The Chair of the Board is not a chairman. It's the chairwoman of the board of Lee and Elliott, and Diane is here. And she's a new member of our board, and we look forward to working with her. Did I miss any board members? Okay, thank you all for being here. Now let's go back to that administrative lead-in. Thank you to APTA and to all of the APTA leaders for their guidance and assistance in presenting this program, especially Chair of the Board Castillo, and the newly elected Chair, I guess he's Chair-elect until tomorrow or this afternoon, Peter Varga. And they're both tremendous leaders. You're going to enjoy working with them. I have the distinct honor of having preceded them by about 10 years, if you don't mind my gray hair, and I know that the experience is going to be wonderful for them and for you. High-speed rail is coming true now in America. As a couple of the gentlemen here are going to tell you, the process has begun. It's begun in the Northeast Corridor with upgrades. It's begun in California with the letting of the first of $6 billion plus contracts for the Central Valley Session. As Jeff will tell you, it has begun with the upgrade of the intermediate high-speed systems across the United States. So we're no longer ready to begin. We have begun. And that means that within the next 10, 15, 20 years, hundreds of stations along those lines are going to be required to greet tens of millions, many tens of millions of people per year at stations which currently may not even exist. They're going to have to be built and feeder systems developed in many cases. In some cases we have feeder systems there, but they're certainly inadequate to handle the vast quantity of riders that high-speed rail will generate, especially in those stations that are associated with adjacent airports that may not be directly connected to the high-speed rail line, which is the majority of the cases. So we're here today not to talk so much about high-speed rail. We're proud of that. We're proud of our president who had the vision. We're proud of these people who've hammered away and supported that vision to the point now where it's becoming reality. It's our job now as attendees at a transit conference to figure out a way to meet those high-speed rail stations, to meet those riders at the high-speed rail stations, and to move people to and from those stations, from their homes to the stations, and from the stations to work. That feeder system usually takes at least 15 years, often 20 to 30 years to build. We have the current chair of the board of BART here. His system has taken 50 years to build. And we know it takes that long. And so those organizations, those cities and counties that are hosting station locations need to get to work now to make sure those transfers are seamless. That requires preliminary studies, requires the federally required environmental impact reports, it requires engineering, it requires the construction process, and then the debugging that goes along with the beginning of a system like that. That takes time, and we have to get started. So what we're talking about today is how to get that done. And I hope that you all, many of you representing systems that are going to have that responsibility, will buy into that responsibility and help us get the job done. Now, the person at APTA that represents the organization that's going to put all that glue together is David Kutrowski. David is the chair of the APTA High-Speed Intercity Rail Committee. He's also chair of one of those feeder systems, although he's much more than a typical feeder system in running the Capital Corridor line, which is a major intercity line in California, which, by the way, is growing by leaps and bounds. David has been identified by having one of the fastest growing intercity rail systems in the nation, and he's here today to give you an APTA welcome. David?
Thank you, Rod. It's a pleasure to be here before you. Welcome to this wonderful seminar we're going to have here. It is very appropriate. It is very well-timed. I know many of the people on this panel, and they're going to give you a great presentation. So on behalf of APTA and its High-Speed Intercity Passenger Rail Committee, I want to welcome you all for being here, first of all. And second of all, I'll give you a little bit of a snapshot of what APTA's been doing, not only with me as the chair, but our leadership team. We've developed principles for the pre-reauthorization that are going to focus on high-speed and intercity passenger rail. And one of the components of those principles, which are going to be going before the Executive Committee for approval, includes connectivity. And I live and breathe that in working with Jeff Morales' team on the high-speed rail, because the rail bond in California includes $950 million for connectivity. And just on our little corridor, we run train service to San Jose, and San Jose is going to be a major hub for high-speed rail. And what we have recognized just in our own growth pattern on the Capital Corridor, we put in additional service back in 2006. Our fare box recovery went from 40 to 50% in 3 months. And we've stayed above 50% that time. It's because we're serving longer distance routes, but making sure those timed connections are just timed and appropriately managed and routinely overseen by my staff and myself. But it is a key testament to APTA encouraging the development of high-speed intercity passenger rail. And once again, I want to take a moment just to thank everybody. I see Senator Galgiani here from California. It's great to see you here. She is a great leader for our state, and I can just go on forever, but I know I only have 5 minutes. But I want to say thanks, everybody. I have Capital Corridor Director Tom Blaylock here, so I want to say thanks to him. And I want to say thank you to everybody, and let's get on with the show. Thank you.
David, thank you very much, and you stole my thunder. Kathleen Galgiani has been the #1 supporter for high-speed rail in the California legislature. As an assembly person, as chair of the High-Speed Rail Caucus, founder and chair of the High-Speed Rail Caucus, and now as a state senator, she has been our crusader. And I would say something about an angel, and she is. Thank you very much. I have invited her to say a word, but she says no. She wants to hear the speakers. Thanks, Kelly. Now, let's know that there are 13 different high-speed rail corridors. They're all in some condition of moving forward. They're all going to have stations. They all need feeder distribution systems. Now, let's hear some ideas on how that might be accomplished. Let's begin with Mort Downey. Now, Mort Downey has often been called the transportation oracle of the United States, and he has earned that title. Tell me another person that would take their vacation and go to China and do a tour of transportation systems. I don't think there are many. And because of his stature, wherever he went, he was greeted by the top executives for those programs and shown the red carpet to their systems. He sent us a summary of that, which you have as we put a little cover on it, and you have then it there. If you want to browse through it while Mort is speaking. Now, don't read while he's speaking, because what he has to say is very important. But I think it's going to become a bestseller, and we're happy to be the first authors, so the first publishers. So please now meet the person who has held more transportation positions successfully than anybody I have ever known. I think any of us will ever know. The person who served the longest as the number 2 person in the U.S. Department of Transportation of anybody who has ever served in that position, Mort Downey.
Well, thank you, Rod, for the introduction, for the invitation to do this. I thank APTA for continuing this great partnership between the traditional transit providers and the other public transportation providers who have to work together if we are all going to be successful. So I'm looking forward to the panel. As most of you could tell, I am not Polly Trottenberg. Okay? I don't even wish I was Polly Trottenberg as of today. I don't envy where she is. She's back in Washington. She is grounded by the government shutdown. And I can tell you, I've been there. When I was deputy, we had a shutdown. Folks like Polly, or like me at that time, who are presidential appointees and who are paid by the year, do not have to go home. In fact, you have to be there. And you're very, very lonely. There you are trying to make things happen, and there isn't even anybody to answer the phone. And if they did call up, you'd have to say, I can't talk to you. So this is pretty bizarre. I can also visualize some of the things that are going on. The White House will be having conference calls by the hour. What's happening in your department, what's happening elsewhere, collecting up the impacts and the concerns. And if this goes on for any period of time, they will start to find some very odd things. You know that the air traffic controllers are working, and you know that the people who run the Panda Cam at the National Zoo are not working. But some of the others, you know they aren't working, but you didn't know who else was dependent on them. So like a couple of days later, OPM is closed. How are we going to hire people for the jobs that are needed to keep safety going? So it just gets worse and worse. And I don't know how many of you have ever been through strikes at your agencies, but when a strike happens, after the first day, it just takes forever to get people back, even talking to each other. And in this case, there isn't even anybody who can tell these two sides that they should talk to each other. So I am concerned. And as I said, I'm glad I'm not Polly Trottenberg, except for the purpose of having the opportunity to make this speech. I will try and cover some of the things that I think Polly would say if she were here. I also have the freedom to say other things that she might want to say, might even say, but clearly would not be fully endorsed by the administration. So I'm a free spirit when it comes to that. So let me start out in the Polly Trottenberg vein of things. What is the philosophy of the Department of Transportation? how does high-speed and intercity rail work into that? As we've seen over 5 years now, the real focus and organizing principle for the department is making the transportation system perform. System performance is really a key part of their thinking. All of our systems. Intercity rail is one piece of that. They're also very concerned about the freight system, how we make that work. I was asked recently to be the co-chair of a National Freight Transportation Advisory Committee to help the department shape the freight policies and freight programs that were called for in MAP 21 but weren't really spelled out. So they look at things at the system level. Try not to just look at the individual silos, not look separately at transit, separately at rail, but how does it all work together to meet national objectives? And I think that ties in very well with the focus of this panel, which is connectivity. Let me talk about that at a somewhat higher level. As the department and the administration look at system performance, they say, how is it going to meet the goals that we have, goals in areas like economic progress, like livability, like international competitiveness, like achieving a state of good repair, and always, and most important, safety in the way our systems work. That's the lens that they look at, and that's what I think Polly would have told us, since her job as Undersecretary for Policy, in fact, is writing the book for the department in terms of these goals. The President Obama, recognizes these are the goals, they're his goals as well, and he recognizes that we need resources to deliver the tools that will allow us to achieve those goals. He's worked towards that. The American Recovery Act, the basic funding source that's brought us all here today with at least a good start on high-speed rail, was focused on those goals. The Tiger program, and we've all worked with the Tiger program that, again, was part of the Recovery Act, as they shape grants with discretion. Remember, Tiger says we can fund anything in any mode for any purpose, but we're looking for the things that actually achieve goals, and that's what they've been doing. We also have heard persistently from the President budget proposals that really reflect the policy issues that he'd like to see in place. Major increases in funding. They have not been received well by the Congress. To some extent, they certainly have fallen on deaf ears. And I don't fully understand it, except when I look at what's happening today. I guess that tells me why nobody's paying attention. But in fact, these were serious spending proposals, truly should call them investment proposals, inside a budget envelope that's been put together that says we are actually bringing the deficit down as a percentage of GDP, as an absolute amount. But we think as we do that, we should be investing. In fact, investing is a key to getting the outcomes we want. But that hasn't helped a lot. I participate in a couple of groups that are looking at the broad deficit issues. We're actually at an inflection point where some of these folks are saying, hey, wait a minute, the deficit has begun to shrink so much that we cannot actually get people together to do something about it, which is too bad, because right now is the time when we could be looking at some of the long-term issues, entitlements, tax reform, and the like, but the actual deficit that we'll see year by year over the next few years is in fact shrinking, and it may be we shrink away from doing what we should doing what we should be doing, which should include investment. Instead, we just have an approach that says smaller government is better government, less spending is better than more spending, anything that goes out the door as money is spending, not investment. So, I think we'd hear that from Polly in defense of the President's budgets. Why weren't they taken seriously? The President put them forward seriously, and we continue to hear that from people within the department. We heard it from Peter Rogoff yesterday. We heard it from Karen Hedlund on Sunday. These are real proposals, and sooner or later, we've got to take a serious look at them. Now, speaking not for Polly, but for myself, let me talk about what hasn't happened and maybe what should be happening. One wishes that people would be getting to the table not just to talk about how to reopen the government tomorrow, in roughly the same shape it was in yesterday. But how do we put a, quote, grand bargain together to really set us on a course that will bring back the economy and bring on new investments? That's what happened 20 years ago. We did have a government shutdown. Shortly before that, we had this kind of a discussion of a grand bargain. Today, if you want to sing Happy Birthday, was the day the gas tax was last raised 20 years ago. That, even in Washington, is beginning to come back as, gee, if there's nothing else that'll work, maybe in polite company we could talk about that. But something that will generate the resources is important, but creating the policy climate in which creating the resources is recognized as an investment is really what we have to do. And that gets us back to high-speed intercity rail. It's fortunate, as we heard from Karen Headland on Sunday, we are doing a lot. $10 billion out there, going to work every day, producing a foundation for what that system would look like, but we need to look beyond that. We're spending more than we have in years and years and years, but we all know there's kind of a cliff at which that number drops to zero. We've got to figure out how not to go over that cliff. It's clear that there will be opportunities to be persuasive on an issue, but we really have to craft the argument. And that, to me, takes me to this theme of today, the integration of intercity rail and urban transit and development of cities and development of regions. That's what we can use to make the case. That's what gets to an investment level that really turns the needle on those national objectives and national goals that most people would agree to. We need to make the case that that investment and mechanisms to finance that investment will have returns, and that the system that can be provided, and this is the total system of transportation, is a way that we can achieve the objectives we'd like to achieve. That well-designed, well-oiled system makes transformational change possible. Truly, I think we'll hear this in some of the presentations, this afternoon, we'll be redrawing the map, redefining the geography. I think some of you know I sit on the Washington Metro Board. Within the next weeks to a few months, we'll be opening a new line, the Silver Line. It'll be halfway to Dulles Airport. Construction is going on beyond to Dulles. That is going to change the geography of the Washington region. We did some polling and market research in the last few weeks. People who live out in that area know now, because they've seen this construction going on forever, that something is happening, and there will be a new opportunity for them to go downtown. We now have to start people understanding that this is an opportunity throughout our region. If you live in Prince George's County, if you live in Montgomery County, you can now shop at Tyson's Corners. It really is changing the geography. It's pulling a region closer together and making it more economically viable, and it'll be even more so when the line gets out to Dulles. But we have to make people to understand that. That's the same phenomenon that will be happening with our intercity corridors at a larger scale. Service on the Northeast Corridor at the levels that Amtrak is proposing will blur the difference between Washington and Baltimore. They really become one economic region. New Haven, where I grew up, will now be right around the corner, not just from New York, but from Newark and Philadelphia. Whole different patterns of economic growth, of economic activity are made possible. Same thing will happen in other corridors. I think we'll hear from Jeff about where Fresno and Bakersfield will now fit within the economic geography of California when they're that much closer to other places. And the same thing in Texas. When Dallas-Fort Worth area and Houston are pulled that close together, it's an entirely different picture with much greater opportunities. And the opportunities are to create economic change that's not just local, it's not just regional, it is national. Remember, 80% of our population in the United States lives in these corridors that we're looking at. That's a leverage point to really change the economy of the country. It's an opportunity that other countries, other corridors, realize and capitalize on. And we know that there are lessons to be learned. I had burned in my mind, and I wish I'd written it down, But from Karen's slide on Sunday, she had the corridors, the money that's being spent, and the economies that are being served. The Northeast Corridor, fifth largest economy in the world. That matches France. Last time I looked, France has high-speed rail, and it pulls that economy together. California, eighth largest, equivalent of Italy. Italy moves on high-speed rail. Those economies are being buoyed. We can do the same at the national level.
You have better wine.
Yeah, good wine, too, right. Yeah, right. There was another corridor, I'm not sure which one it was, but the smallest of the ones on her map was the 20th largest economy in the world, fitting in right between Sweden and Switzerland. High-speed rail. It can work. The critics say this is a big country, long distances. It isn't. It's a collection of regions within which economic activity occurs, and we should help build that economic activity. Longer distances are possible. In my little travelogue, I describe my high-speed rail trip from Beijing to Shanghai. That's some 700 to 800 miles. It's actually almost twice as far as Boston to Washington. But it was a 5-hour trip. 5 hours and 11 minutes on the timetable. Also 5 hours and 11 minutes on the trip. Right on time. And it's changing the relationship between those two areas and for the benefit. The train was full. It was full of people who knew that they could now change the business relationships that they work on. Other countries, again, taking explicit decisions based on this idea that smaller geographic regions, because you've pulled them together, will function differently than they have in the past. The economists call that agglomeration. Always sounds like something gooey, but we can call it connectivity, whatever you want to call it. We have made regions that are more effective. In the UK, the governments there now, Tories and Liberal Democrats, they are investing. They're building the Crossrail project, bringing all the parts of London much closer to the center, where they will intersect with high-speed rail that they are also investing in to connect Birmingham, Manchester, and London. They see it. They see that very analytically. They went through this and said this is the single best investment we could make in the United Kingdom if we wanted to generate big increases in the GDP. Better way to spend the money than motorways, better than runways. This would pull a fairly tightly knit economy already much closer together and get the benefits. Also on my trip, I visited Hong Kong. Hong Kong, as you know, is kind of an appendage of China. It is actually now under Chinese control, but it is a separate economy with a separate government. They said, hey, wait a minute, don't leave us out. We want to be connected to the rest of China. And the Hong Kong government has tasked their transit system, the MTR, to build the high-speed rail connection that will bring Hong Kong in as part of the Chinese high-speed rail system. Partly so that businessmen in Hong Kong can go do business on the mainland, and also, very importantly, so consumers from China can come to Hong Kong and have access to the shopping malls there, which incidentally are actually built and developed by the transit system. A wonderful experience to walk through a transit station and realize you're now in a shopping mall and you didn't know the difference between them. But they see that's what drives their economy, and they, actually in this case, the government, is paying for the construction of this line, which starts out right at the downtown transit hub and then moves you quickly to Guangzhou and then from there on to the rest of the Chinese system. Other connectivity in China, I was amazed when I went from Beijing to Shanghai. The Shanghai high-speed rail terminal is a wing of the airport terminal at the domestic airport. It's like a three-part terminal. 1/3 of it is the high-speed rail terminal, with all of the connections, including the transit connections to get you downtown, but also the connections to aviation to get you around the rest of China. I wouldn't recommend it. You've flown in China recently, be used to 3-hour, 6-hour delays because they've got no airspace for the planes. But if that's the only way you can get there, that connection is there for you. So that's the vision we have to put forth. But I think it has to be not transportation guys saying we'd like to have a big train set. It's visionaries who see that we've got to have a better country, got to have a country that functions better, and that leverage in our regions is the way to get there. System-wide investment covering all the modes, covering the connections that will spur economic growth that is nationally significant, nationally important. And then if we can make that vision, then we can talk about how to pay for it. I think we always make the mistake of talking about how to pay for it first before we talk about what you're going to get. How many things have you ever purchased when somebody said, I want you to spend a lot of money and I'll tell you later what you're going to buy? We got to say, why are we doing this? What do we want to achieve? What are the best ways to get at that? There are lots of different opportunities. Most countries, in fact, do not function as we do with dedicated trust funds that serve both as a floor and a ceiling of what we spend. They see investments as national opportunities, and they pay out of their general fund. Others have some form of dedicated revenues. I can see arguments for and against all of them. The one argument I can't accept is the argument that we shouldn't invest. So we really need to define the investment, define it as a total system that operates for our economic benefit, and once a majority, I guess it has to be a significant majority, the way our government works now, can then say, that's what we have to have. Now let's talk about how we should pay for it. And then we'll talk this afternoon about how some of the systems that are heading out in the right direction are going to provide this connectivity, this seamless transportation opportunity, and the economic growth potential for their regions.